The smell of blood still lingered in the air. It was the kind of smell that did not belong to animals or hunting. It was the scent of pain, of people who had been hurt and left behind like they did not matter. Jonah Hale rode slowly through the open grassland, his horse stepping careful over frozen dirt and dry weeds that snapped under hoof. The sky above was pale and quiet, the kind of morning that looked peaceful but never felt safe. Then he saw them. 5 bodies hung upside down from a rough wooden frame, thrown together in the middle of the field like someone had rushed to finish. A cruel job before dark. Thick ropes dug into their ankles so deep the skin had turned raw. Long black hair fell toward the ground, brushing the dirt. Their bodies were tall and strong, but covered in bruises and whip marks. Torn clothes clung to them, scorched and stained with dust and dried blood. Jonah's hand tightened around his rifle without him even thinking about it. One of them was still conscious. The woman hanging in the middle opened her eyes and stared. Straight at him. There was no begging, no tears. Just a sharp, fearless look that made Jonah feel like the one being judged. She looked taller than the others, with broad shoulders and a chest that still rose and fell, even though every breath clearly hurt. She was holding on to life through sheer will. Jonah understood instantly. Slave traders. They had not killed the women yet, not because they had mercy, but because they wanted profit. Jonah had seen enough of evil to know that sometimes people kept others alive only because they planned to sell them later. Maybe the traders hung them like that as punishment, or as a warning, or as a way to keep them helpless until morning. A part of Jonah told him to turn away. He had done his time. He had left the army behind. It buried too many bodies for causes he did not even believe in anymore. He had walked away from war because war never ended, even when the fighting stopped. But the woman's eyes never left him. And in that moment, Jonah Hale knew that if he rode away, he would never feel like a man again. He dismounted and walked closer, boots crunching over frost. The women did not cry out. They did not plead. They only watched him like wounded wolves, waiting to see if he was another hunter. Jonah pulled out his knife. The first rope fell. The woman hit the ground hard, but Jonah caught her shoulders enough to keep her head from slamming into the dirt. She grunted once, then forced herself to stay quiet. Jonah worked fast, cutting the other ropes one by one. Each body dropped. Each woman landed with the heavy thud of exhaustion and pain. Jonah did not waste time. He lifted the nearest one first, her weight solid in his arms. He carried her to his horse, tied her carefully across the saddle, then came back for the next. He made trip after trip, moving like someone who had done this before. Like a man who knew what it was to drag the broken out of hell by the time he finally rode toward his cabin. The sun was already lowering, and the wind had turned colder. Jonah Hale's cabin had never been this crowded. 5 large bodies were scattered across the narrow wooden room, taking up nearly every inch of space. Jonah pushed his table against the wall and stacked 2 chairs on top of each other just to clear the floor. The cabin smelled like smoke, damp wood, and blood. A harsh mix that reminded him too much of the war. The women lay there without complaint. They did not groan. They did not scream. It was like they had already learned that pain meant nothing to the world. Jonah boiled water in an old metal pot and tore up worn shirts for bandages. His hands moved with an old rhythm, the kind of steady motion that came from battlefield habit. He cleaned wounds, wrapped bruised arms, pressed cloth against open cuts. When he leaned down near the woman, from the middle rope, he saw the rope marks around her ankles. They were deep, red, and swollen, like the ropes had been tightened with anger. As Jonah reached to cut away what was left of the rope fibers stuck to her skin, she opened her eyes. "Do not," she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady, not weak, not afraid. Jonah paused only a second. I am not planning to tie you up again," he replied without looking at her. She watched him for a long time, her face tight with pain and pride. Then she finally spoke again. "My name is Tala." Jonah gave a small nod. Jonah. Later, when the fire had settled into a low, warm glow, Tala leaned back against the wall, her broad arms wrapped around her bruised ribs like she was holding herself together. The others slowly woke up, blinking through the pain. Their eyes scanned the cabin, then landed on Jonah with a hard kind of caution. They were not used to help. Tala spoke first. "Blunt as a knife. They killed our husbands," she said. Jonah froze for a moment, then kept working, pouring warm water into a bowl. "Not in a war," Tala continued. "Not over land." Her jaw clenched. Her eyes stayed dry, but her voice carried a heavy kind of grief. "Just because they were drunk and wanted to sell people." Another woman, shorter, with a deep bruise across her cheek, added quietly, "They said they would come back for us." In the morning, Jonah's hands slowed. He had heard stories. Men in towns whispered about traders who captured people like cattle, sold them across borders, and laughed about it afterward. Jonah had always hated those stories, but hatred was easy when it stayed far away. This was not far away. This was 5 lives on his cabin floor. Jonah stared into the fire, watching the flame bend and shift like it had its own mind. "I used to wear a uniform," he said, voice low. "I was taught that if you followed orders, everything would turn out fine." He swallowed, feeling old. Memories crawling up his spine like cold hands. It did not. Tala stayed silent. Her eyes did not accuse him. They only watched him like she was listening to a man confess something he had never said out loud before. After a long pause, she spoke. "Again, we used to believe too," Tala said, "that if we stayed quiet, if we endured, we would be left alone." Her voice cracked slightly, not in weakness, but in tired truth. She looked toward the other women. Then back to Jonah. "Now we have nothing left to lose," she said. Then she added softly, almost like she was reminding herself, "except each." Other Jonah looked around the cabin. 5 women who had been hung upside down in a field like meat, now sitting upright, breathing, alive. "Here," Jonah said slowly. "At least for tonight, no one will touch any of you." Tala's eyes held. His, this time there was less suspicion, only the faintest flicker of trust. That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls. It sounded like a wild animal circling the cabin, trying to find a way in. Jonah barely slept. He sat with his back against the wall, rifle across his thighs, eyes fixed on the fire. Every time the wood popped, the women jolted awake. Their bodies reacted before their minds could catch up. Like they had learned to wake up expecting violence, Tala was the only one who did not fall back asleep. She sat upright, even though each breath clearly hurt. Firelight danced across her bruised face, showing strong features shaped by survival. Not a soft beauty, a hard beauty. It's a kind that came from being tested and refusing to break. "You do not need to stay up all night," she said softly. Jonah did not turn his head. Old habit, Tala nodded like she understood more than she said. Outside, the wind screamed again, and the roof creaked. Jonah finally spoke, his voice quiet enough that the others could not hear. "I used to think," Jonah said, "that once I left the army, everything would stop." His jaw tightened, but some nights I still hear the screaming, he admitted. "Not from the enemy, from the people I could not save." Tala watched him without blinking. "We carry those sounds too," she said. "Children crying, houses burning." Ropes tightening her hand drifted down to her ankle where the rope marks were still swollen. "Sometimes I wished I had died with them," Tala said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "But then I remembered," she continued, voice low. "If I died, the past would sleep easy. The fire collapsed inward, its light softer now. Jonah stood and added more wood, feeding the heat like he was feeding hope. "This place is not much," he said, "but it holds." He turned to face her. "And I know the mountain paths around. Here," he added, "they will not find it easily." Tala rose slowly, wincing, but standing tall anyway. She took a step closer, not close enough to touch, but close enough that Jonah could feel the warmth of her body pushing back the cold. "What? If they come back?" she asked. Jonah looked her straight in the eye. "Then they will not be hanging anyone ever again." He said it was not a speech, not a promise. Made to sound good, it was a fact. Tali studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, and for the first time since she had hung upside down in that open field. She allowed herself to believe that tonight they would survive. Morning arrived in a silence that felt wrong. Jonah noticed it before he even opened his eyes, because there were no birds. No soft sounds of life returning with daylight. Only stillness. He stepped to the narrow window, pushing aside the thin curtain. Then, grassland outside was dusted with a light layer of snow. The sky was pale and empty. The wind had shifted during the night, leaving the world strangely quiet. And then Jonah saw them dot horse tracks, not many, but clear enough, leading from the edge of the woods straight toward the cabin. Jonah's stomach tightened. Slave traders never left anything behind. They came back for what they believed belonged to them, and they had arrived earlier than Jonah expected. He turned around. The 5 women were already awake, standing close together like a pack that had learned to survive by staying near. Tala stepped forward, her eyes locked on Jonah's face. "They are coming," Jonah said simply. No one screamed, no one begged. Jonah opened an old wooden chest and pulled out 2 rifles and a revolver. He laid them on the table. His voice was calm but sharp. "I do not hand out guns to people who do not know how to use them," he said. Then he pointed toward the back door, where a narrow trail slipped down through a rocky crevice. "But you need to know the escape path," Jonah added. "If things go bad, follow that trail. Do not look back." Tala did not move. "What about you?" she asked. Jonah loaded his rifle. The click echoed through the cabin like a warning. "I stay," he said. The sound of hoofbeats rolled through the town. Cold air. 3 horses, then 4 drunken voices followed. Laughing, cursing. The smell of alcohol seemed to drift right through the walls with the wind. A raspy voice shouted from outside. "We know you are hiding our goods." And there another voice laughed. "Come out, old man." No need for blood. Jonah stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The barrel was lowered, but still ready. "There are no goods here," he said. Only a home. Laughter burst out again, louder this time. One man rode forward, gun in hand, eyes mean and half drunk. "I see the drag marks," he called. "Do not try to be a hero." Jonah said nothing. Then a shot rang out from the ridge. The bullet sliced through the air and slammed into the wooden beam beside Jonah's shoulder. Jonah fired back immediately. A warning shot into the ground, near the hooves of the lead rider. The horse screamed and reared up, nearly throwing the man. Jonah's voice came out low and steady. "Back off," he said. "The next one will not hit dirt." Silence settled like snow. The slavers pulled their horses back a few steps, cursing, hate burning in their eyes. "This is not over," one of them growled. Jonah did not move. His rifle stayed aimed even as they turned and rode away. Behind the door, Tala watched his back. She watched the stance of a man who chose to stand, not because he had to, because he decided to. And in that moment, Tala understood something that changed everything. They were not just refugees anymore, And Jonah Hale was no longer a man trying to hide from the past. He was a man who had finally found something worth facing the future for. They came back before the sun reached the mountaintop. This time there was no laughing from far away, no careless shouting carried by the wind. Jonah heard them first through the ground, the dull vibration of hooves hitting frozen earth. Slow, heavy, organized. He knew that sound. Men who came prepared did not rush. 6 horses stopped in front of the cabin. Jonah stood on the porch before they even called out. His coat hung open, the rifle resting against his shoulder like it belonged there. The cold wind kicked dust and snow around his boots. Inside the cabin, everything was silent. Too silent. The men did not hide their weapons now. Rifles hung openly. Revolvers sat loose in holsters. The man in front spat into the dirt and looked up at Jonah with a crooked smile. "Old man," he said, his voice thick with drink and confidence. "You really think you can keep those 5 pieces of merchandise?" Jonah did not answer right away. Inside the cabin, the women stood close together. Jonah knew it without looking. People who had survived hanging learned to listen to silence. "Leave," Jonah said at last. "This is your last chance." One of the men laughed. Another leaned forward in his saddle. "I heard you used to be a soldier," the leader said. "But I also heard you have no army now. No badge, just a rotten cabin and a few Apache women." Jonah stepped forward. The porch creaked under his boots. "They are not merchandise," he said, "and they are not going anywhere." The leader's eyes darkened. "So what?" he said slowly. "You planning to die for them?" Jonah turned his head just enough to glance at the cabin door. Behind him, he did not need to see through it. He knew Tala was standing there, listening. Then Jonah faced the men again. "They are my family," he said. His voice was calm, clear, certain, "if you want to take them." Jonah continued, "You will have to walk over my dead body." Silence fell. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Sensing something had changed, one of the slavers raised his gun first. Jonah fired faster. The shot cracked through the air and tore into a wooden crate tied to a saddle. Splinters exploded. The horse screamed and reared, throwing its rider sideways into the dirt. Gunfire erupted. 2 shots slammed into the cabin walls, punching holes through old wood. Each shot measured inside the cabin. Tala did not freeze. She opened the back door and motioned the others forward. Their bodies still hurt, but fear no longer ruled them. Then Tala stopped. She turned back, no weapon in her hands. Only her eyes fixed on Jonah's back as he stood alone on the porch. Drawing fire meant for all of them. The gunfight did not last long. One slaver cried out as a bullet grazed his shoulder, knocking him sideways. Blood spattered the snow. The others hesitated. This was not what they had come for. They hunted the weak, the bound, the helpless, and here there were none. Cursing filled the air. Threats followed. Promises of returning with more men. Then they retreated. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Swallowed by the hills, Jonah stayed where he was, breathing hard, rifle still raised. Smoke drifted lazily around him. Only when the echoes fully disappeared did he lower the gun. The cabin door creaked. Tala stood there. She said nothing. She just looked at Jonah like she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a rescuer, not as a stranger, but as someone who had chosen a side and crossed a line that could never be uncrossed from that moment on. Jonah was no longer just protecting them. He had chosen them. Night fell slowly, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Jonah sat on the porch steps, wiping black powder residue from his hands with an old cloth. His shoulder ached, not from a wound, but from hours of tension. When he finally stood and stepped inside, the fire was low and steady. Tala stood near it. Her bruises were still visible, her wrists still marked, but her back was straight, her eyes clear. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. "I did," Jonah replied. "I chose to." She stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that Jonah could feel the warmth of her presence. He had lived without that warmth for a long time. "Do you know what this will bring?" Tala asked. "I do," Jonah said. "But I have spent my whole life doing what others told me to do. This time, I decide." Tala stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched the small cut on Jonah's cheek. The gesture was careful, unsure, like someone not used to touching without fear. "No one has ever stood in front of us like that," she said. "Not soldiers, not white men." Jonah gave a faint smile. "I have never stood in front of anyone like that either." The space between them closed without either of them noticing when Tala leaned in first. The kiss was slow and heavy, not rushed, not claiming. Just two people making sure they were still alive. Jonah's hand rested against it, her back solid, warm, real. The fire burned low. The wind stayed cold outside, but inside the cabin, the cold no longer mattered. They said no more words, just one night where no one ran. No one listened for ropes or boots or screaming. The next morning, Jonah woke early. I still slept. Beside him, her breathing steady, her face calm in a way it had not been before. Pale light slipped through the cracks in the door and fell across them both. Jonah sat up quietly. The world outside was still dangerous. The slavers might return. The law might come. Trouble never stayed away for long, but something had changed. From now on, Jonah Hale would not be standing alone on that porch anymore, and that made all the difference. The ground softened after the first thaw. Jonah noticed it one morning when the shovel no longer rang against frozen earth. The blade sank in instead, slow and steady. It was a small change, but it mattered. The cabin began to change, too, not all at once, but day by day, the way real things do. The roof was patched carefully, not rushed. The fence stood taller. The narrow trail through the rocky crevice was hidden beneath dry branches and stones. Small choices made with purpose. This was no longer a place to hide for one night. It was becoming a place to stay. Tala worked from sunrise to dusk. No one told her to. No one ordered her. She chopped wood with arms that still showed bruises. She hauled water with shoulders built for carrying weight. She fixed walls, mended cracks, and stood watch when the wind turned sharp. The kind of work that made even grown men pause before starting. The other women found their own rhythm. One cooked. One mended clothes. One kept the fire alive. One gathered herbs from the hillside. They did not talk much about what they had lost. They did not need to. Loss lived in the way they moved, careful but unbroken. The difference now was simple. No one chased them away. One afternoon, Jonah saddled his horse and pulled on his coat. "I am going to town," he said. "A few days." Tala looked at him. She did not ask when he would return. She only nodded once, like someone who understood that trust sometimes meant letting a person walk away and believing they would come back. The town had not changed. It was loud, dirty, full of eyes that loved to pry into lives that were not theirs. Jonah kept his words few. He met an old lawyer who still remembered his name. He signed papers, used old connections from his army days, not to threaten, not to demand, but to protect. He did not talk about slavers. He did not talk about gunfire. He talked about a home. When Jonah returned, a light rain was falling. The cabin stood solid against the gray sky. Tala waited under the porch roof, uncovered, as if she had known the moment he would appear. Jonah handed her the papers. He did not explain much. No one has the right to take you away anymore. He said. Tala held the pages for a long time. The words were not written in her language, but the meaning was clear. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had been done. You did this, she said quietly. Jonah shook his head. For all of you, that night they sat around the table. No one rushed the meal. Rain tapped gently on the roof. Steam rose from bowls filled with warm food. It felt strange, almost dangerous, to sit like this without fear. One of the women spoke softly. We could plant crops in the spring. Jonah looked around the table. 5 people who had once hung upside down in a dry field, now talking about planting food. The cabin was no longer a place to run to. It was a place chosen. Spring arrived without noise. It came in the smell of wet earth after rain, and small green shoots pushing up from the soil. Jonah noticed it one morning while leading his horse across the old field. The wooden frame was gone. All that remained was open ground and memories. No one needed to speak about anymore. The cabin felt stronger now, not larger, just fuller. There were signs of life everywhere, tools leaning where they were last used. Laughter, awkward but real, slipping out when no one expected it. Jonah and Tala did not talk much about the night that changed everything. Some moments did not need words. Saying them out loud only made them smaller. One afternoon, Tala worked on the fence while Jonah stood beside her, silent. The breeze carried the scent of new grass. I am not good at saying things, Jonah finally said. I know, Tala replied without looking up. Jonah took a breath. I cannot promise you an easy life. I can only promise I will stand beside you. Tala turned to face him. Our eyes were not searching for poetry, only truth. That is enough, she said. They did not need rings. They did not need a preacher. The wedding took place beneath an old tree behind the cabin. 4 women stood as witnesses. No dress, no ceremony filled with words. Just 2 people standing side by side. Jonah took Tala's hand. Her grip was firm, warm, real. This is home. Jonah said. Tal nodded. Spring spread around them. Crops were planted. A new pen was built. The women stayed, not out of debt, not out of fear, but because they chose to. The slavers never returned. Maybe they heard stories. Maybe they learned some places were no longer easy to take from. Jonah still woke. Some nights, Tala still went quiet at times. The past had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled them. The cabin that once held one lonely man now held a family built by choice, not blood. A place where people who had once been left to die upside down in an open field had planted their feet and decided to stand. And in that choice, they found something stronger than fear. They found a future.